Hi guys, and welcome to this week's episode of Behind the Frame. As you can see, a little bit different to the usual office environment. I'm in the Timbavati, so part of the Greater Kruger National Park, just bordering on the western side of the Kruger National Park in the Timbavati complex. And there's a series of properties around this area and lodges as well. We're at Umlani Bush Camp at the moment, and we've had a great couple of days, some really good sightings. And I thought that for this week, I would use one of the images that we shot just 2 nights ago on safari with you guys in terms of how we got the shot, what the settings were, and how I go about processing it. So this was the sighting that we had. We'd followed these males for a good 20 minutes before they got to this pan. We knew that there was water around, and by the time we got there, we were able to position ourselves for them to kind of come down and have a drink. And as you can see, the sighting was quite special. So, how do you capture a scene like this? There's some challenges here because obviously it's very, very low light. The light is provided by a spotlight. Here we have a tracker who shines the light onto the subject for us in an ethical manner and making sure that we don't blind or disturb them. And so you've got very low light. And so the first thing that one needs to be aware of is your ISO. And if you have a look over here, this was shot at ISO 5000, 135 mils. So this was on a 70 to 200 mil lens, obviously just kind of in between, right at about 135, f2.8. So this is what the beautiful part about these f2.8 lenses are. So apart from being able to give you a very shallow depth of field, they literally suck in light, and 1/400th of a second. So I didn't want to mess around too much here. Obviously with the lapping of the tongue, you want a slightly faster shutter speed, and in order to kind of get a correct exposure at nighttime with that sort of shutter speed at f2.8, you need to crank the ISO a little bit. This was on a 1DX Mark II, and at ISO 5000, I'm quite happy that we're going to be able to get away with a very cool, clean image. So let's have a look at how we get into the editing on this. And I mean, there really is very little that needs to be done. The adjustment that I made in camera was to shoot at a white balance of 3050. So normally these kind of spotlights, and if you've shot like this and you're still on your normal auto white balance, the images tend to look a little bit like this. So not quite correct. The spotlights that the guys use are often a little bit warm, and they throw this orange-yellow cast across. But in this instance, on the first night, we'd already clocked the spotlight and temperature value to be compensated for correctly at about 3050. If anything, we can lift this up just a touch just to warm up the oranges and yellows. But as we go in and add some whites and contrast to the shot, we'll be able to see that those colors will come back in any case. So from a basic side of things, all we're going to do is just kind of tease up the whites just slightly. Highlights, you'll see that when you shoot like this, the majority of your subject is actually highlights. At this shutter speed, we haven't really lost any detail here. I do think that we could afford to just drop the exposure just slightly, so just by 0.45 here. So I could have used a slightly faster shutter speed shooting in full manual to get the same sort of effect, and you'll see that what that's done there is it's just brought back a little bit more detail into the face. So we've now been able to get there. We're going to go down to our tone curve. And often what I find in shooting at night is that the shadows and the darks and the blacks, these areas around here, are not necessarily pure black. They become a little bit more washed out gray. So I pull down the shadows, add a little bit more contrast in there, really getting them nice and deep and black. And the same with the darks, just down a hint. And then lifting the lights a touch, just adding a little bit more contrast. And you can see that that then just really makes the face and the eye pop quite nicely. Again, using a subtle vignette, you'll see that there are some kind of features in the water over here. So if we apply a subtle vignette, pulling it down into the middle, and we use the midpoint, and what that does is it brings the effect closer towards the line, and then we just feather those out a little bit. It's a very subtle adjustment, but what it does is it just kind of takes away, you have a look in that top left-hand corner and around here, it just darkens those areas. Now, from a localized adjustment perspective, we grab the special adjustment brush over here. We want to dial up this reflection just a little bit. So I'm going to go in here with a flow 50, a small brush. I'm just going to work over the line's face. So we have a look O for overlay. You can see the area that we're working. And rather than actually tracing out the exact area of the line, I'm not going to do a global adjustment on exposure or anything here. All I'm going to do is I'm just going to lift the whites, and I'm going to lift the highlights a little bit, and you'll see that that reflection in that face come through. Let's go switch off this brush a little bit for us here so we can see before and after. So this was before I lifted that, that's after. So just dialing up the presence of the reflection in the water. And then I'm going to add a new brush, and I'm just going to go over the face a little bit. So we hit O for overlay, and we're just going to brush around this area here and onto the main, O for overlay, and all we're going to do here is just lift the clarity to a value of 19 or so. And so what that does is it just punches the face a little bit more. So that is pretty much it. There's not a hell of a lot to be done. We can go and have a look at our sharpening as the final. We go down here to detail, I'm going to mask, and to something along those lines. Those are the areas that we're wanting to sharpen. And just dial that up just a touch. Noise reduction on a global scale across the image at a value of 10. And as a full screen final image, this is what we're looking at. So an incredible sighting, probably one of the best male lions drinking I've ever had the opportunity to photograph, and I know that the guests were very happy with what we got as well. It just goes to show that when you get things right in camera, there's very little that actually needs to be done after the fact. That's it for this week. Tomorrow I leave the Timbavati and we head up to Kenya, to Amboseli and Tsavo. So next week, the Behind the Frame series, the images will probably be something from Amboseli, and I look forward to sharing that experience with you guys. Till then, cheers.